This presentation builds on research that I've done with Dr. Andreas Kokkinis and an ongoing British Academy funded project that I'm leading with Andreas as well, and a professor from the business school at King's, which focuses on culture in financial firms. So the key question I want to ask today is, how can we build a finance culture that embraces and promotes sustainability? And the other sub-questions: should financial regulators set regulatory expectations on how financial firms' culture can support sustainability? And what are the supervisory tools that we can use in promoting a culture that is aligned with sustainability? So first, I would like to briefly outline what culture is and the drivers of culture, and perhaps talk briefly about healthy, purposeful culture. This is the term that the Financial Conduct Authority, Conduct of Business Regulator, uses in the UK. And then I will talk about how can culture support sustainability aims and goals in financial firms, and what are the supervisory tools that can assist in promoting a culture that is aligned with sustainability. So basically making that link between culture in financial firms and sustainability, and what regulators and supervisors can do about it. So there is little agreement across management scholars on what culture is. And the often cited definition of SHINE refers or identifies 3 layers of culture. That's known, probably you know, the onion model. So we have the deepest layer of basic underlying assumption, and then we have a middle layer of espoused values and ideology, and then we have a surface layer of a more observable factors, such as artifacts and behaviors in firms of the members in the firm or the organization that reflect those assumptions and shared meanings. And these layers, of course, they differ in their observability and, of course, in their susceptibility to transformation. So this multi-layered nature of culture inevitably will dictate a supervisory focus on the more visible aspects of culture that can be assessed, that can be managed. So what is healthy, good culture? We know that it's a regulatory objective and a supervisory objective. And this is, I think, not surprising, since a culture of excessive risk-taking and short-termism was identified as a key culprit of the 2007-2009 global financial crisis. So the calls to integrate culture as a key regulatory and supervisory objective were, in a way, an organic development of that. And culture took a prominent place in financial regulation at the global level, but of course also in the UK on the FCA's agenda. So the most significant shortcoming of good culture is, of course, the difficulty to measure it. So the FCA, therefore, doesn't attempt to assess the mindset and the behavior directly, but rather focuses on assessing the main drivers of culture. So they look at a firm's purpose, they look at the leadership, they look at the approach to rewards, and they look at how they manage people and governance arrangements. So these are the drivers of culture. But the emphasis on culture and its drivers is not unique to financial regulation. Just to clarify, we can spot it in the UK Corporate Governance Code and the Stewardship Code, as you can see from the highlighted principles on the slide. But one aspect that is common ground, if we look at organizational culture scholarship, when we look at features of good culture, is the crucial role that leaders or leadership plays in shaping culture, in shaping values, in shaping goals, and setting incentives and providing examples of appropriate behavior. And we have many examples of poor leadership that led to the development of unhealthy bank culture. And particularly prior to the global financial crisis, many of the bank executives were idolized by the business community that admired these fearless strategies, and the management style of senior managers was described often with overconfident managers who often impose overt economic violence that actually create this culture of fear for staff and of course stifle also contrary opinions. For instance, just to give one example, Fred Goodwin was the former chief executive of RBS. He was awarded the Forbes Businessman of the Year. He was, of course, got knighthood for his, and he was referred actually as the best banker in the world. I would say not despite, but perhaps due to his aggressive macho management style. And he was famously known as Fred the Shred. So to achieve this purposeful culture, the focus on purpose should begin at the top. So managers must act and be perceived as acting in ways that are consistent with the values that they want employees to share, or in simple words, walking the talk. But the FCA also reiterates that it should be complemented by turn from the middle, where the middle management in the firm assist in transmitting, diffusing that culture within the firm at all levels. And of course, if we're talking about large global financial firms, then this is not an easy task and requires a well-functioning board, senior management team that retains this effective oversight of the mid-level management across the whole organization. And just as a side note, in the British Academy funding, we committed, or in the proposal, we said we're going to interview between 30 to 40 mid-level management, because we thought they're actually the ones that diffuse that culture within the firm. So far, we got about 25 senior managers, so CEOs, they're all willing to talk to us, but none mid-level management. So you can see the interest at the higher level, but not mid-level. So in addition, the FCA highlights the importance of psychological safety to speak up and challenge the accepted norms and the role of diversity and inclusion in providing effective challenge and promoting a truly safe culture. But how far does actually healthy, purposeful culture reach? Does it require firms to demonstrate a broader social purpose? What is that purpose? For instance, do they need to show consideration of environmental, social, and governance factor? So the FCA, the regulators in the UK, currently the vision of purpose is, I think for the time being, modestly designed to fit within the operational objective of consumer protection. And accordingly recognizes, of course, the social value of firms in providing these financial services and achieving positive outcome for customers and markets. So currently the regulatory guidance focuses on the contours of culture, locating responsibility for the development of culture rather than on the substantive content of purposeful culture. But I think that, and this is a big but, I think this is changing. The signs that this is changing. So changes, of course, driven by consumers, investors. So if we look at data, almost 80% of us think that businesses have a wider social responsibility than simply to make profit. It's driven by financial firms, at least at the outer level of the onion first. For instance, we can see defined purpose of a firm explicit drive to create value beyond profit, specifically for people and planet. So we can see that kind of terms used by financial firms. A shift in regulatory focus is, of course, aligned with proposed changes, amendments that we're seeing in the UK. So we have a bill that's in its final stages that will require regulators in the UK to consider objectives of the target of reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions of the governments, but also a recent change a few days considering biodiversity and nature in the objectives. And we also have, thank you, we also have a new discussion paper by the FCA. And there, of course, as you can see, I've put on the slide, the regulatory focus of the FCA focuses on data disclosure, how financial firms should manage risk from the environment, and scenario analysis, but not so much about culture. And there are, of course, much discussed challenges that we can talk about: greenwashing, the need for global harmonization of climate-related disclosure. But there are also initiatives that are there to address these challenges that you can see on the slides. So I think regulators are much more ambitious, and it starts, of course, with the scope. So if we look at the FCA, it clarifies that it's not just about the environment, but wider issues. So they talk about biodiversity and nature, but also diversity and inclusion, living wage, fair taxation, and supply chains, much broader. So the scope is very important, and this is, of course, in line with the broad definition of sustainability of the UN. ESG sometimes is used interchangeably with sustainability, and that, of course, captures the key dimension of the wider sustainability. I think the FCA is very innovative in addressing diversity and inclusion, and they introduced the consumer duty that will take effect this month, and they promote this clear purpose and culture that supports also stewardship. But financial firms are still lagging behind in these areas. And for instance, the regulator sees that firms often focus on almost exclusively, for instance, on gender representation at senior level, because there are external targets, because there are expectations. But this may also indicate, thank you, that there is a compliance approach rather than a genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion. And we can see that regulators are then going beyond work on diversity and inclusion. But what does it mean in practical terms to financial firms? What are the actions that firms need to take to build culture that supports its sustainability-related objective? Well, first, they can update the performance criteria and remuneration policies to ensure that these are aligned with their climate and sustainability-related objectives. They can assign responsibility to individual and update board and committee mandate. Thank you. And we have requirement of the prudential regulator in the UK to do that. So we can see sustainability committees very prominent. Champions is a good method to ensure that culture that promotes sustainability is embedded within the firm. And of course, regimes of individual accountability that assigns this this function to specific individuals, often known as the chief value officer. So just to kind of skip to the last one here, to what are the recommendations that I suggest? So clarifying the scope and bringing to the fore social policies beyond environment, to be inward linking. So we look at stewardship, we look at sustainability, they have evolved, but culture has also evolved as a driver to improving conduct, and it would be beneficial to bring those aspects together and form a coherent supervisory approach and clear vision. And the last point is outward linking. So financial firms and sustainability should not be examined in isolation, because it should be done alongside the exposure of firms to stakeholders, including clients and supply chain, because as much as banks, they have targets and they aim to promote it, if it doesn't trickle down the stakeholders and clients and supply chain, then action will not be sufficient. Thank you.